Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Uncutting Creativity with Chad Hobson, So Indifferent. And today we have
Porter Smith.
Porter Smith.
Is that me? Am
Yeah.
I supposed to speak? I was waiting for my big introduction.
Yeah. So Porter and I connected. I actually did an interview with a buddy of mine, Eddie, from one of the men's group. Actually did an interview with him recently, and Eddie thought it'd be a great idea for me to connect with Porter. And I actually had a 45-minute call with you, Porter, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it was transformative for me, because that conversation really had me, it gave me an opportunity to really understand what I was doing, where I am as an artist, and it comes to the understanding that there are other people that have had similar experiences in terms of pursuing the arts and creativity and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So Porter, I'll give you an opportunity to share a bit about yourself and where we can find you, and just a little bit of your story.
Sure. I'm deep in a life in the arts, and I stay deep because I'm pushing 60. I'm 57 years old, and I've been aware of this path, I would say, consciously since I was 7. So I would say, fundamentally, I've been on this path for 50 years without a conspicuous representation in the world, and I say, not that I haven't been performing and presenting my work for most of that time. Certainly not when I was 7. 7 to my pre-adolescence or through my pre-adolescence, I was not as active, but I was recognizing that these particular expressions that we deem artistic in the world, that they were kindred to me. I was aware that words meant a great deal to me, that music was having a profound impact on my whole being, and I could feel it. And I felt, I think, particularly at that impressionable age, that sort of, in some respects, that threshold time of innocence, where you're coming out of a real childhood dream into a world where people are expecting you to go to school, are expecting you to behave a certain way. I think that age of 7 does have a cultural weight across the world cultures. I think it really is a substantial reckoning time for a young person. And right around that time, when I was made aware of arrangement in gatherings with my friends, in school, you start to get a sense of your place in the world, even at that young an age. And what came at that time was an understanding of communing with these insubstantial elements, this idea of music, that it really wasn't something anyone was able to explain, even certainly not to me at the age of 7, but it wasn't something that was readily explained. So you're walking around in the world hearing music, and no one is saying, this is what music is. It's just going on as this wondrous thing, and some people are talking about chords, and some people are talking about melodies. So you're getting a sense of a world's definition of music, but it's still elusive. And when you're young and you're catching the frequencies of these things, it really does have the potential to grab your senses in a profound way and anchor itself in a fashion that isn't finitely fixed. It does go into these deep places inside of you, and if you're kindred to it, which I was, maybe you felt the same when you were very young, what happens is that you develop a relationship with it before you've even begun a pathway of expressing it. And this did come before I was singing, and I was singing at a very young age. But I think my passion for music was really more of almost like an interior curiosity, because it was just fascinating to me that I could be taken away from something I'm doing if I'm hearing a song, and it would take away my whole attention. And I mean, I was that I was that altered in my senses by the presence of certain music, and it ranged. I had exposure to different kinds of music, but I was listening to the radio when I was young, and the radio when I was young was a pretty rich palette of creativity, and you were hearing songs that weren't at the time deemed radio songs. It was just music that would be playing on the radio in the 70s when I was growing up. And so that's how it rooted itself in me. And then as I came of age and was following my pathway in the world, I was going to school and I was taking on a lot of interests. And I think that's a piece of my understanding of what it means to land firmly in the arts. I think the pursuit of the arts is not as descriptive as a lot of people might believe. I think in some ways you find yourself very naturally in the arts if you've done many things. And I don't know how you feel about this. I don't know we don't know each other that well, but I don't know about your background in sports, but I think the pursuit of the athletic was certainly an indirect pathway to
interesting
creativity. Maybe even more than that. Maybe if I'm not giving it enough of a role, of a true role in that. That development.
What were the connections, would you say, sports to music, and how that allowed you to kind of step into your creativity?
I think, well, not just music, but any of the arts. I think it has to do with discipline.
Oh, okay.
And I think it has to do with repetition.
Yeah.
I think those are we both understand that from doing any kind of project. And sports, there's something really wonderfully parallel. And it does drop off. It can't translate perfectly because sports are, not to everybody, but sports are result oriented. And you do hear in that realm a lot of truly coaching away from it as an art form, even though we do cite certain athletes as being artists and artistic and, whoa, look at this display of artistic ability on this field or on this court or whatever it is. But it is result oriented, and that does take it away from the arts. But inside of that, you have all of the preparation, which to some athletes is misery and to others is a joy. And to me, it was a joy to practice and to lift weights and to exercise and work in essence, all the muscles around the art form or the expression of the sport itself. There was so much that went in. Even at a young age, I was aware that you don't just show up. You have to cultivate these things, and then it's the practice upon practice. It's the repetition, and all of that translated directly to my pursuit of writing, my pursuit of music. Music is a very clear parallel because you don't find yourself running, but you find yourself sitting and practicing and practicing and practicing. And it's as disciplined as I would say when I was getting a little bit more evolved with basketball in high school and then in college. I think what I would say would be the most parallel for that, as it aligns with music in particular, is shooting left-handed hook shots and then right-handed hook shots, and 10 left-handed hook shots and 10 right-handed hook shots, and then spinning one direction and spinning the other, and doing this all by myself on the court, hours and hours and hours, practicing, imagining also as what happens in music when you're practicing and going over lines, you are somehow framing it as a performance. And you're not performing, but you are framing the idea, I think. I mean, I don't know if everyone else sees it that way, but I don't think it's ever separate from the idea of it being placed in a performance setting, that it is for other people. And just like in sports, when we get to the higher level of sports, these people are well aware that they're entertaining, or they're, that's the colloquial term or the vulgar term for it. But I think for those of us who love physical expression and see it as artistic, when I'm watching a fabulous athletic performance, I do see it on parallel. I don't see it as art, but I do see it as something for the sake of others. It is something
Hmm.
that we behold and we say, my oh my, isn't that a beautiful thing? And I think that is where sport hands the torch off to the arts, and then the arts go off and culminate in another and on another plane. That's in some ways the sorrow of sports, that it's a young person's pursuit, that we tend to we tend to talk about it in the past much
Yeah.
more. The arts, we talk about the arts in the past too, but the arts are a little friendlier. And as we've come to understand certain contributions, from the Renaissance up till today, we do have representatives in the arts who are committing to their finest work deep in their lives. So we do know that the arts are not as fickle as sports, in the sense that you can only serve as a functional artist in sports until around 40, but in the arts you might be coming into your power at 40, and then you might have a
Yeah.
good 40 years of that, where ideally you're distilling your work in the most true way. And that would be
Hmm.
I think that would be the artistic ideal. It doesn't always happen that way. And in the pop world, I mean, that's another whole discussion if we ever get into that. But the pop world has deceived us in a way, because it does hold some of the same material values as the sports world and anything else that's in the popular realm. Whereas the
Hmm.
art realm crosses into the popular, but I don't think it's naturally set there. I think we've forced it there, and that is some
Hmm.
of the. I think that's some of the distress in the world, is that we're not really able. A lot of us, and if you listen to people, a lot of people aren't able to talk about art. They're really only able to talk about pop art and popular expressions that end up in front of them, and that have a ticket attached to them, and then they can
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
witness it. But the whole subculture of the arts, that which keeps it in fair ballast in the world, has to do with what you and I are doing together at this point today, and how you and I understand in each other without knowing each other very well. We do understand that we're holding up a torch, because something about the arts has beckoned us, and something about the arts keeps us inclined toward its demands, and we are filling it up. We don't know each other's schedules each day, but just from our last conversation, I
Yeah.
would say that we're able to say that each of us can be found deep in that world most of the time. And
Yeah.
we're in some
100%.
ways we're easy to find. This is what I often say to people: if you're looking for me, I'm easy to find. You might not
Yeah.
be able to pull me out of what I'm doing, but I'm not hard to find, because it's something I would like to say about this lifetime in the arts.
You hit
Just
that
through
on the nail on the head.
yeah,
Personally speaking, like I am very easy to find,
yeah, yeah,
but it's pulling me out of that
yeah.
that
That's a
tends
little
to
bit
be
of a
the
challenge.
difficult
Yeah,
thing. Yeah.
that's the burden others have to bear sometimes. I mean, sometimes we're
Mhm.
available, but you have to protect people from that part of you, and let them know. Just let them know that you're there, but you will need a moment or two to
So how
examine your other setting if you're pulled
so
out of it.
how that's something I think over the last like wow, like probably like last like 7, 8 years, 9 years. That's something that I've been dealing with. How do you in the past, maybe even now, how do you find a balance between, let's say you found your I don't want to call it a passion, but you found your the thing I'm trying to get across is, so for
Yeah.
me personally, I've been able to understand the creative side of myself,
Mhm.
how it works, where it comes from, and ultimately the energy that it is. And I've been able to kind of put it outside myself and look at it and see it. And it's this very chaotic um, ball of like energy. And I remember
Mhm.
drawing it in a sketchbook years and years ago. It's just
Mhm.
like I had an image of this thing in the corner of a room that was just like chaotic. But
Mhm.
in that, there's beauty, there's art, there's all this kind of stuff.
Yep.
And I find that as creatives, a lot of the time we're walking a very fine line between going in there, creating stuff, but there's even opportunities for you to slip and fall into something
Yep.
because it's so powerful. how do you find how do you draw a line between indulging in the creative output and really touching base with the deeper parts of yourself, then also being present in the world and having those human relationships?
I think that's really, you touched on it right at the end of your expression there. It's how you negotiate the rest of your life that is the great challenge, because it might not be. I think some of the challenge that you're talking about is the reckoning of the two planes, because the creative plane is a plane that is very challenging, is furious, does have its elements of great challenge, great. It's imposing, I mean, to say the least. But I think some of the calm, at least, or the resolve that descends upon someone who's been doing this a long time is knowing that you belong in that field. I think there's a relationship that you develop with those elements, and those elements do come into a compositional unity at a certain point, not just the projects that you might be working on, but your relationship does come into order when you understand that you belong there. And I think with that, and maybe when you're called to face these things, you either are bringing to that setting a certain courage, even maybe a certain fearlessness, because there is that disposition to a lot of artistic people where you are the person in your circle more than likely who's willing to jump off the ledge into something that's unknown. And a lot of that, I think, is the turbulence of that world, that reckoning. But I don't think you'd have that reckoning if the world were more congenial to the artistic pursuit. I think because it's so foreign in the world, we really are talking more about how to wield this matter that is complex. It is somewhat, in its essence, invisible matter, and it's hard to explain to others. And we are so wrapped up in it and so devoted to it, and it looks maybe crazy, and maybe it is crazy, but only, I think, in respect to the world. So to answer your question, fundamentally, my ability to wrangle this, and it's not the art that I'm wrangling, it's the world that I'm wrangling. I think the key, if I could distill it into one centerpiece, I think it has to do with accepting that you might not be normal, and that abnormalcy, that abnormalcy is a vital thing. We have to have people be authentic in the world. Certainly, you want authentic friends. You want an authentic lover in your life. You want to be in the company of authentic people. So if you're pursuing something that by nature is going to be ideally eliciting your most authentic self, then you have to take a good look at what those demands are saying about you. Like, what does it say about you, Chad, that you sit and work on these sometimes obscure visions for hours and hours and hours, and you justify that as a good use of your time? And when you look at it from the world's perspective, it looks like you're kind of a madman, and it looks like you're doing something that's not really, in worldly terms, utilitarian. It's not necessarily immediately showing its value. And yet the world does value art. The world does value something that's deemed artful or deemed wondrous, whatever that would be in the world's terms. But we have to go into our own process at different times and not let the world tell us that what we're doing is esoteric or it, since it's not understood, that it's not valuable. And I think
that's the thing.
That
Sorry,
piece of it. Yeah, I just think that's the piece. Just to answer your question as fully as I can with that one component, I really believe it's about identifying what kind of person would do this? And that kind of person is a fully functional being, I believe, and somebody who has a full range of emotions, is very authentic. Someone we might even idealize being, but that person might not, in the context of the world, be normal. And that doesn't mean the person is not acceptable. It doesn't mean the person isn't useful. It just means that when you get in touch with what it means to be an artist, I think almost foremost, you're looking at something that's moving away from convention entirely, and definitely moving away from some kind of a dictation of what it means to be normal in the world. And then for the sake of the person, and I speak for you and I speak for myself and anyone else who is committed to this path, it's about having some pride and be pride. It's no different than someone saying, well, you have to wave your freak flag. However people articulate it colloquially in the world, we are in a position where some of the distress that we feel in the arts, I think, has to do with our self-doubt, which doesn't come necessarily from us, definitely doesn't come from the muse and from the artistic forces. It comes from our training, I believe, and everything about us that is questioning whether or not we're functional.
Good enough.
And
functional.
Good enough, functional enough. And we also want, somehow some part of us wants not to be abnormal. But I think that's the problem. I think defining yourself as abnormal when you don't see it, when you don't see that as a slight to your character or as a slight to your functionality in the world, when you see it as simply as a description of you, and you're just putting it in the context of the world. You're not, I mean, you and I are unto each other are not abnormal, but I'm actually going to be judicious enough in my understanding of the world to say, I accept the world's perspective, and I accept a lot of my friends and a lot of my acquaintances don't quite know what to do with me, not as a creative person, but as a person. They can't quite wrap themselves around why this is my whole life passion, why I can spend on one line that I'm working on 10 hours. Why that's, I mean, that's just not normal. And they're right. But I don't think in the artistic realm, it's anything but perfectly normal. And it's just about knowing your crowd. And sometimes I liken it, and I don't want to, I feel like I mean, you are interviewing me, but I want you to have a voice.
No, this is great. I have a bunch of points that I want to refer back to.
But I think about the circus, and the circus is a worldly institution, and we have come to understand it as a place for eccentric people making offerings for the world. And I think it does serve well as an allegorical depiction of what it's like to be deep in the artistic life, not on the surface, not just visiting it in a leisurely fashion, but committing yourself to it, bleeding into this life path. I think it does bear some of the marks of the circus, where the world loves it, but the world doesn't really understand it and doesn't want to get behind the curtain. They don't want to see what it takes to maintain that world. And the people who are in it live for it. The community is part of it. There's something going on there. And I do reference it oftentimes in my work, just because it cites some of that eccentricity and some of that madness, but it also does bring into this account that these circus acts in our lives, they do draw attention. They do draw the attention of the masses. So we're back to that original point that people do want to, I think you made this before we started this today when we were just chatting. You made this point about people do want to support the arts when it pleases them. And so you and I have the burden to bear of being artists, but also being, I think, fairly accessible. We can't always be the favored artistic expression of the world, but we do have to, we have to hew some kind of a direction in our lives that makes us not extreme artists who have no relatability at all. We don't have to be relatable to every person on the planet, but some of the challenge of being an artist is about distillation of extreme ideals and then bringing them to earth and making it that not the whole population, but a portion of the population really would benefit. And that's again that somehow that analogy of the circus being half useful sometimes, just because it does bring in some of the wildness and it brings order to it, because the people themselves don't see their lives as circus lives. They just see their lives as their lives. They just happen to belong. And again, that word that comes back, that the idea of belonging, I think that's a critical piece of the arts.
Oh my God. It's the most, I think, like, there's so many things that you said that are just like, oh my God, boom, 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 boom. But to the last point, the belonging, I think for me personally, having been in various different aspects of the arts, I didn't really feel as if I belonged only until like the last probably 2 or 3 years. And I think it was more of like a self-acceptance and understanding. It was like, oh, okay, I know what I'm dealing with. And I think it's this idea of, because you mentioned like music and how it had an effect on you growing up. I think I've always known that there's like something different about me. I just couldn't put my finger on it. And not to say that I was better or worse than, it was just, there's something that just, I don't know if I was the only one picking up on it. And the same thing is, you don't want to sound like you're crazy. But one of the realizations that I made earlier this week is, and you kind of touched on it earlier as well, is like, I have this thing I'm aware of. Not everybody can see it, but they can see it manifest. They can see it through the music. They can see it through the acting. They can see it through the design. They can see it manifesting. Why isn't anybody else talking about this invisible thing? And I think the thing that I realized when it's my parents or just in life in general, and you touched on this when it came to basketball, is the idea of just doing that one thing repetitiously and doing it over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I remember when you were saying that, my bass guitar is in the corner staring at me, so I can always see it in the corner of my eye. But I remember when I first got my first bass, I was at home and I was playing like anywhere from like 4, 5, 6 hours a day. I stayed up until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning just playing. And I remember one day my mom came in the room, like, "What are you doing? Like, go like pick up an extra shift or something." I was like,
do something useful.
Yeah, do something useful. But it was like, "Mom, like, this is what I need to do. It'll make sense later on." And I knew it was going to make sense, because it's like, I need to learn this little part in order to learn the rest of the song. The songs make me better.
Well, it's the demands.
It's the demands. And one thing I realized was, this is something that's always going to be there. There's always going to be something outside of me saying, get back to this, go do this, because the world's moving. You're human. You have to do things. But the one thing I found,
changing as well.
And I'm changing. But the one thing I found that really allowed me to make sense of all of it has been recording, sketching, and journaling. So one thing that I would do would set out to learn a song. I'd record myself trying to play it. And what that did was it created reference points for me to kind of go back to. And one thing that I realized looking back at all the reference points is I've been able to take my creativity to different avenues and different places and do a bunch of different things. But at the same time, being like, I like to think of myself as like a social scientist and just like a student of myself. I could look back and know that, oh, wow, during this period when I was doing that, I was experiencing that. So there's an intensity of emotions there, but I was able to use that to my benefit. Or when I was playing this instrument in this band, I was able to express a lot of aggression and anger, and it was such a positive outlet. And now that was gone, the aggression and anger is still there, but there's no outlet. What are some of the things that you've been able to look back at and see the correlation between your creativity in the world, or just something that you learned about yourself, if you don't mind sharing?
No, not at all. I think it's the root of the creative process. It's in some ways that secret that you were mentioning that people aren't talking about it much. It's not just the reward of it, because that might be conspicuous for people when they see someone like Ella Fitzgerald singing. If they see an old clip of one of one of the finer performers in the world, you see something like that, and you watch her go off into this place of bliss. You can see it. It's really very patent and in her performance in different takes of that, different witnesses of that. But that's the part that people, I think, are accustomed to. They see, even in sports, they see somebody raising up arms when a goal is made or when something happens that's exceptional. People are celebrating while they're doing it, and even musicians are seen maybe more subtly because it's not a result-based expression. It's more interior. But there are those moments where you see that people are going off into this reverie and this place that looks like a place people want to visit. And I think there's some kind of a connection there. They think it must be really wonderful to do that. And so that's a piece of the fruit, but it's also, it's actually more related to the interior of the artistic process, which I think is what you're talking about, where you're learning about yourself, you're learning about what makes you truly happy, not what gives you pleasure. And the difference between a hobbyist in these pursuits, and there's certainly, I find no fault with art in any form. I think the world celebrating art in any capacity it can is a better world than us separating out the artists from people who are not. I don't think it works that way. I think the art is commanding the world, not the people. So the artists are, maybe paradoxically, the artists are the lowest. We're underneath even the people who are doing art as hobbyists. The artists are below that because we're actually holding it up. So I think the art is the goal or the vision, and we as people who are expositors of it and those who want to distill it and understand it and embrace it, I think what's happening inside of every composition, inside of every practice session, inside of every daydream, there is a sense of asking the question, maybe coming close to answering it more fully each time. Why are you here? Yep. Why are you in this place as opposed to the place where you would be listening to a song on the radio, or where you would be going to a museum or going to a performance, seeing a theater performance? Why are you on the inside of this? And that communion can be witnessed by people, but they're not going to understand it. They might misunderstand it and then be drawn to it, almost like the fruit of the rock and roll life, which is that you get to meet people, you get to have a life that looks like a really far-flung magical life. That's the fruit. That's not
sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah, that's not the experience of it. But inside of that, you do see some of the essence of it, because some of these people are very sincere, and some of these people are showing you that inside of this expression, even while it's happening, is this communion with someone's understanding of why music is not enough in the form of an MP3 on your iPod or in your desktop. It's just not enough to be visiting music. It's not enough to be visiting the composition of a poem, to be studying a poem, but some part of being a performer, some part of being a writer, a creative representative inside of that is beckoning you. And that relationship, I think, is constantly self-teaching, but it's also telling you something about you that you might not know. So in the sense, it actually knows you very well as you are coming to know it. So sometimes when you're communing with these forces, and I tend to refer to the whole embodiment of the arts as the muse, because I clearly have a relationship with that spirit, that creative spirit, and that is a communion for me. This spirit that maybe called me when I was very young told me that I wasn't going to be fulfilled in this terrestrial life if I simply became a fan of music, or I became an art critic or something of the sort. For me, it's really the artist's path, and I didn't understand that when I was young. I didn't even understand it as I came of age. I simply knew what I loved, and I loved many things. I didn't identify it as an artist's path. I think I identified it as some things being extremely artistic and some things being creative, like being someone who can cook, being someone who can do interior design or build things, all of that, all those other pursuits that I followed in order to make a living while I was trying to forge my path as an artist. All of them had creative elements, but it was very clear where the line was that differentiated the craft pursuits, or the somewhat result-based, or in the food sense, the edible arts, as opposed to the longer-lived visionary things. And I think, I don't know if this answers your question sufficiently for you, but I think the relationship itself is that, and it's by nature, it's going to be this teaching thing, and every time you go visit it, you're certainly learning things about the art. You're evolving if you're staying on that path. It is an evolutionary path, but I think more than that, you're reinforcing this idea that it's not, in simple terms, it's just not enough to be a lover of the arts. That's the starting point for people like you and people like me. I think we begin there, and then we find ourselves wanting to be challenged and wanting to commune not only with finished work in the world, but with the raw elements that often I refer to as the well. It's that infinite creative well. So, to dip the ladle in that well is to have all of this matter that's inexplicable matter, and to be somebody who wants to work with that, wants to be able to wield that matter. I think that is somewhat self-teaching, and from that grows this constant sense of how that manifests descriptively in certain moments, where you understand that you're somebody who loves complex harmonies, or you're somebody who loves moving bass lines as opposed to tonic bass lines, bass lines that just kind of sit inside of the composition. So as you understand your own artistic leanings and your own artistic, let's say, uniqueness or passion, all of that is part of the learning. But I really think it's more rooted, if that makes sense to you or to anyone who might be listening to this. It's really where you're found at the center of this communion with art that separates you somewhat from the people who are able to critique art, able to enjoy art, able to say, this is a work of art, this is not quite, and people who have a good aesthetic. But it's more than that. It's more than having a good aesthetic.
100%.
It's about being comfortable. Again, it's about being somewhat fearless, and it's also about being okay with identifying yourself as somebody who, in artistic terms, is kicking a ball into a net 500 times in a row, whereas the rest of the world would want to do that one time and say, well, I got that experience. But we're not looking for the experience. We're looking for the depth. We go deeper and deeper by doing the same things. It's kind of like a mantra. We say the same mantra, but to us, it's not the same mantra. It sounds different. The syllabic resonance of it is different. Everything that we do, when I'm playing the same lines as you are, on the bass, on the guitar, on the piano, singing the same lines over and over again, it's maddening to people around me. And I try to make sure I'm mostly, if not always, private. And it's not always the case. Sometimes you do have, sometimes my partner is hanging about, and she does voice that it maddens her. But at the same time, she understands that it's for a good cause, and it's even for her cause, because she's a marvelous singer, and I do write for her. So in some ways I'm excused a little bit, but I still understand that you have to protect people from this particular madness. And I don't have to protect you from explaining it. You don't have to protect me, but we would even have to protect each other from our own particular pursuit of this, as much as we understand it and as much as we might even be okay with some of it, your way of doing this is going to be perfect for you, but probably not perfect for any other creative person on the planet. And mine